Mark's version of the gospel, as we have said before, always moves so fast. And so we are catching the baptism story at the very beginning of Mark's gospel. Jesus is baptized in the River Jordan and very soon goes out into the desert where he spends 40 days. It is a 40 days in the wilderness that is meant to mirror in some ways the 40 years that the Israelites spend in their exodus out of Egypt. And in some ways, the period of time that they spend in exile in Babylon, always this sense of being apart, being separated, and relying on God. That's what Jesus is doing in that desert space between Jericho and Jerusalem. Not a far drive. Dare I say one could walk from one end to the other. It's about a 4,000-foot decline, so you'd want to walk downhill and not uphill, but alas, it's not a wide space. And yet here is where Jesus spends 40 days in isolation. For a place where so much seems to happen, there is so little there. Jesus is learning that firsthand. This is a story you know because it is so critical to our understanding of Lent, right? Lent is a 40-day time in which we're meant to sort of mirror that, follow Jesus into the desert. All that leads up to the Holy Week, the holiest week in our church calendar, when we remember his entrance into Jerusalem, his breaking bread with his disciples, his agony in the garden, his trial and crucifixion, and his glorious resurrection on the third day. But there's something that jumped out at me in the telling of this story today, something that I hadn't noticed before. Maybe if I had noticed, I hadn't really noticed it in a way that really stuck with me. But it's there in the second paragraph. Jesus is out in the desert, alone, isolated, and angels cared for him. Maybe we have this story a little wrong. Maybe Jesus wasn't alone in the desert. No, Mark makes it clear. And angels were there and they cared for him. Jesus was learning what all of us are learning, that our utter dependence comes from God alone. Every day is a blessing. And angels waited and cared for him. We have a whole history of angels in the Bible from the very beginning. One of the first encounters with angels comes from Jacob. Jacob has a dream that God will make his people a great nation, and he has this vision of angels descending and ascending, and it's a remarkable experience. And yet later, not but a couple chapters later, there is Jacob, and he is asleep. And somehow he wrestles with an angel. He wrestles with this angel, and then he comes to terms with the fact that the angel was not his enemy, but was there on behalf of God. And he says, I have seen God. And we're meant to think that that the angel was able to not overcome Jacob. But Jacob's reaction was to fight the angel, to wrestle with the angel. We have other images of angels, of course. We have the image of the angel Gabriel visiting Mary. She didn't fight it. She stared Gabriel in the eye and said, okay. We have angels from book to book. And angels here in this story who cared and waited on Jesus in the desert while he was alone. My seminary in New York, General Theological Seminary in New York, had a beautiful chapel. I say had, still has. Beautiful chapel with beautiful stained glass windows, the kind that really tell a story. And there was one in particular that I loved. It was of an embrace between an angel and a human being. And I have a picture, just like Karen, I brought show and tell too. I have a picture of it there. You see this angel that's hugging this person. And I loved that. I thought that was just, it always warmed my heart. And so I remember one day pointing that out to a student of mine, a colleague of mine. We were looking at the stained glass window and I said, isn't that beautiful? This sign of sort of the heavenly world and the human world coming together in this embrace. And then here comes this senior. And seniors are the same, whether they're in seminary or they're in high school. A senior who is just weeks and months away from graduating is always a little checked out and a little bitter and a little seniorish in their attitude. So here we, this fresh class of students, and we're looking at the stained glass window, and here comes the senior, and he looks and he goes, "You idiots." He goes, "That's not a hug. That's a fight." Look at it again. That's not a hug. That's a fight. That man is fighting the angel. It's Jacob. Jacob is fighting the angel. When I think about the biblical history of angels, whether we are embracing them and letting them care for us, or whether we are taking them on and trying to pin them down, somehow that brings this story and this year into a clearer light. Let's start over. I told you Mark moves fast. Mark moves really fast. And in fact, in the Greek, it says that Jesus is not sent into the desert. He is not led into the desert. Some of the other gospels use that term as if somebody is taking Jesus's hand and walking him into the desert from the river. No, Mark says ekbelo. The Greek is ekbelo. It's where we get the word ballistic. Jesus is not led into the desert. He is catapulted into the desert. He is thrown into the desert, violently so. There's this sense that he is rushed against his will, that all of a sudden, all of the scenario around him, all of the world around him has changed fundamentally. And where before he was down at the oasis of Jericho, at the oasis of the River Jordan, where there were people and there was water and there was life, now he is removed from that. He is alone in the desert. All of a sudden, ekbelo. Jesus is coming to terms with an abrupt reliance on God. And the next 40 days will be a gift to him, even as he struggles. They will be a gift to him because he will see every day is not guaranteed. And the angels will come and care for him. And perhaps unique to us, he will embrace them. He will allow them to care for him. He will not fight them. I said that brings the whole year into light for me. We know something about being abruptly cast into the desert, do we not? Ekbelo. Boy, that's March 15th for me. That was the last time I saw all of you here, and we gathered. It felt good. Ekbelo, how the world had changed. Within a week, we had figured out how to shut down so many of the things that this church does. I remember meeting with the wardens, with Deb and Lori and Stuart and Kelly, and thinking about all the ways in which we would turn off a church we had worked so hard to bring to life and to grow. Ekbelo. My, how everything changed. And yet, have we not also learned that every day that we have had since has been a blessing? And all the more that it has not been guaranteed. All the more that everything that we have, every breath we take is a gift from God. And we're meant to know about our reliance on God. In some ways, this will be the best Lent ever because we have been preparing for it for a year. We get the theme. We know what it's like to be set apart, to be alone and isolated, and to rely on God for everything. Such as this year and this season of Lent that we begin today. But like last week, I have 3 questions for you this week. Who are the angels in your life? You see, it may seem that we have been in this alone. We may seem that we have been in the desert alone. That's what I always thought when I read this story. Jesus is there in isolation in the desert by himself, but he's not, friends. He's not. God sends angels to care for him. He's got company, and it's a celestial company, a wonderful, holy company. No one ever gets annoyed by the presence of an angel. They're there, and they're wonderful, and they're beautiful, and you're so glad to have them around. Who are those people in your life? Who are the angels in your life? Appreciate them today. See that God did not abandon you. God did not leave you to fend for yourself. You are not alone. Even as we are separated now, we still have each other, do we not? Look around. Look at all of you in your wonderful squares and your wonderful homes. Look at all the new friends and faces that we have joined and invited in this year. Dare we call them angels too? A second question. How do you treat those angels? Now that you know who they are, how do you treat them? Do you wrestle with them like Jacob did? Do you try to tackle them and pin them down? Or do you let them care for you? Do you let them love you? Do you see that they are a living reminder of God's blessing and favor, and that you are not alone in the wilderness? I think about the angels in my life. I have many. I'm seeing dozens here. All of you are. And yet in the pace of this year, sometimes I get frustrated just with everything, anything. Who hasn't? I think about how lucky I am to have someone who loves me and 2 dogs. And yet very often the house doesn't seem big enough to spend a whole year. But it's good to be reminded that the people you have, well, they are angels. They are there to remind you that you are not alone. And as we name them, we think about how we treat them, then we might come to appreciate them more. Which leads to the third question. Who are you an angel for? Just as there are others in your life who are there as reminders of God's presence, God's favor, God's belovedness, God's you're never alone. You have the capacity, have the blessed calling of being angels for others. Who are you an angel to? How do you treat them? When you show that God's favor, do you do so in a way that is loving? Are the words of your mouth, are they signs of God's blessing? Or are you the kind of angel that when you come around, people, they run? No, none of you are. Those are the 3 questions I have for you this week. Who are the angels in your life? How do you treat them? And who can you be an angel for? And we think about who you can be an angel for, then we can't help but wonder, how can we better show God's love? Now that we see our wings are unfurling, how can we better show God's love? If we do that, then we will honor the man who spent 40 days in the desert. And dare I say, we'll also honor all those angels that made sure he was not alone.